Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so I have a really nice game here for you. This is taken from round 2 of the Magnus Carlsen Invitational from the Champions Chess Tour. As you guys know, I get really active whenever there are tournaments. I try to be pretty much the first person to cover games. Try to make sure I cover my Wesley for my people in the Philippines. And so, as you guys know, I do my broadcasts and stuff in English, but I do speak Tagalog quite a bit for my people in the Philippines. So, for all my people that are coming from the Philippines watching my stuff, magandang umaga or magandang hapon if it is afternoon for you when you see this, or morning. Maraming salamat po sa nanonood aking mga video. Ingat lagi, mabuhay to you guys. Appreciate it very much for you guys stopping by. And we do have another Russian matchup as well. So if anybody is coming from Russia, I will say привет and spasibo for watching my video. So I'm just saying hello and thank you in Russian. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. But if you guys are ready, let's go ahead and take a look and see what we have for this second round of the tournament here. All right, cool. So we have e4, e5, knight to f3. Knight to c6, bishop to c4. Sorry, I accidentally hit the button too quick. Bishop c4. We have knight to f6. We got d3, bishop to c5. So we have the Giuco piano, and this is the Giuco pianissimo, which that is Italian. Giuco piano is Italian for quiet game. Giuco pianissimo is Italian for very quiet game. And, you know, as you guys know, these games aren't always quiet. You know, these games definitely have a lot of fireworks that can roll off and be killing. So anyway, we have a c3. We have castles by black, castles by white. We have d6, knight b to d2. We have a5. We got rook to e1. All very standard moves. I mean, you know, white is just trying to make sure that, you know, in the case of a bishop pin or something like that, you know, we have the knight that's covering there. You know, we're just trying to expand and make sure that we're not subject to any type of b4 situations for black. So, you know, we're just giving our bishop some room to breathe. So we see bishop to e6. We have bishop to b5. Now, you know, as you guys can see, you know, possibly if we have some pawn pushes, you know, the square d4 or d5 can be really juicy for a piece to jump into. So black is going to try to combat that with bishop to e6. You know, they're not really worried about trading here and, you know, the pawn taken back here, because you do get an open f-file for the rook. And you also get a nice cluster of pawns in the center for you to start making some pawn pushes. So it's actually pretty beneficial for black if white tries to you know, to trade here. So that's why we see bishop to b5. So we have queen to b8. We have bishop takes c6, pawn takes c6. We have knight to f1. And like I said, I mean, this is not the worst case scenario, because the queen now does have a little file to work with. And, you know, we're going to be seeing d5 come at some point, probably, maybe, I'm not sure. But that's usually the idea, to start to try to open the game up and to try to get rid of this bad pawn here. Because long term, that is a bad pawn to have or whatever. So we have h6. We have knight to g3, rook to e8. We got h3 and we have a4. And so now we have the novelty of the game. It kind of jumped around a bit for a couple of moves, but this is actually a brand new position as of 2021. And so, you know, constantly finding, you know, novelties in games and stuff like that. So it's pretty interesting. As much as chess has been played over the centuries, you would think that it's pretty much been played out. But because of computers, you know, we literally can just, you know, not us, but the computer for us can create all these different novelties and things like that you know, we probably weren't able to kind of see before. But anyway, so we have knight to h4. We have king to h7, knight h to f5, making sure you denote which one moves, because the knight g could have moved to f5 as well. So we see knight back to g8. We see queen to d2. We got queen to d8. And so we see king to h2, and we have h5. And so we have d4, trying to make sure, because we did move this king off the protection of this pawn. So, you know, if we do want to move the queen, we got to try to get the bishop out of the way. So the bishop comes back to b6. And if you want to go ahead and stop the video now at move 18 and see what Sergey Karjakin actually played in this position, it's a very interesting idea that I think he had in this one. So like I said, if you want to go ahead and stop it real quick and see if you can find the move that Sergey Karjakin, the idea that he kind of put in there go ahead and do so real quick. Okay, cool. So it's actually a blunder. This is actually what he does. I'm not sure exactly what his idea was when he was thinking about it, but he basically just places himself in an exact fork, which is something that's really counterintuitive. And usually you have some compensation for doing so, but there really isn't any in this position. And the move that he made was knight takes h5. And so, you know, like I said, there's not really anything, there's not like a special idea that's going on. I mean, once you do see g6 coming, which is automatic going to come, you could have also taken here with the bishop. But I mean, it's just a lot cleaner just to go ahead and fork, you know, the two knights together. He's kind of thinking that he has a lot of pressure here on this h6 square, you know, with the bishop and the queen and stuff like that. But it just ends up not being anything because if, as you'll see in a couple of moves, black would have to basically blunder the position for it to end up being something. So we see knight to h6, pawn takes h5. We see knight takes g8. But if we go back, of course, if we see this, I mean, this is just going to be checkmate in two. So we're not going to see that. So I don't know if maybe Sergey was kind of thinking that his sacrifice was going to be, you know, a little bit stronger than that. I'm not really sure exactly what he saw in this particular position. And he basically just plays the game being a piece down now. So after, you know, we saw knight to h6, pawn takes h5, and then we saw knight taking g8. And so king takes g8, and we see queen to h6. We got bishop to d7. All right. And then we have bishop to g5. And we have, so like backing up here, so we had bishop back to d7. So something I want you guys to be paying attention to. Not every single time that an opponent makes a sacrifice, it's a sound sacrifice. Sometimes it can be kind of tricky to try to figure out which is sound and which is not sound. A lot of times when you see somebody make a sacrifice on your position, you're thinking, man, did I miss something? Like, did I forget? Did I overlook something? You know, because you never really know, you know, until you sit there and calculate like what's good. So a general rule of thumb, you know, when you are sacrificed against, is to try to defend as much as possible, right? And so this is a beautiful move here, rook to d7 or bishop to d7, because you'll see in the next move, after we saw bishop to d5, we see rook to e6. And so what this does is backing the bishop up to d7 gives the rook the ability to basically rook lift itself. And you guys heard me talk about in the previous video or two when I was talking about these rook lifts, right? You know, getting a rook to the third rank or your own third rank, which would have been like either one of these or whatever. So what this does is it laterally protects, you know, all of these squares, and it makes it really hard for white to actually produce some type of an attack, especially because, you know, white has the ability to do their own little rook lift here, but the problem is this rook is in the corner. So when you do, just for your own sake, when you're playing games, when you do make a sacrifice or you're contemplating one, normally what you want to have is you want to have more pieces in that particular section of the board than your opponent does. And as you can see right now, yes, this bishop, this rook is in a corner and this bishop's kind of offsides a little bit, but within these three pieces here, they kind of have more pieces than white does in that particular area in the name of defense. And so you'll see that Wesley so defends this beautifully. So the queen takes on h5. We see queen to f8. So now, I mean, you're protecting the checkmate square if there is one. You know, you're setting up all kinds of possibilities. The pawn takes e5, pawn takes e5, rook a to d1, and then you see the bishop back into e8. So as you can see, the rook is protecting this rank. The bishop is protecting this pawn. The queen is, the king is. Like, there just really isn't a good way. And this bishop is actually perfectly protecting, you know, the e3 square. So there's not really a good, you know, there's not a lot of good penetration that can occur because the rook can easily just swing over here to g6. So we see queen to h4. You know, of course, trying to set up like a dream checkmate scenario. But these are all like just dream chess situations. You know, the knight being taken and checkmating and then being able to set up this like beautiful checkmate here. You know, on h8, it's just all dream type stuff. The rook comes to g6, like I said. We see bishop back to e3. And we see bishop takes e3, rook takes e3. But as you can see, even though, you know, white is starting to get some pieces into play, you still have too many pieces here defending. And there's just really not a lot of an attack, you know, that you can try to do. And the fact that your pawn is on h3, it prevents your rook from trying to come over. And, you know, the queen can very easily come here to g7. So You got queen to h6, queen to e7, and then you have the very, very perfect move, queen to g5. Something else that you want to do, if you've been able to successfully defend against an opponent's attack, you know, their sacrifice, then what you want to do, your first thing that you want to try to focus on is exchanging queens or just trading pieces down in general. So one of the rules is if you have more pieces, you know, material than your opponent, trading down is going to be beneficial. Not always, but it's going to be pretty beneficial for you because, you know, you're just going to end up with an extra piece at the end of the day. So one of the main pieces that you want to get off whenever an opponent sacrifices against you is going to be the queen. Because, you know, there are so many tactics and tricks that you can kind of like muster up when you have queens on the board. So as you can see, Wesley So's first thought is to try to exchange this queen off the board. And what he's doing is he's actually setting up checkmate in one. So now you have no choice but to trade. So the queen takes g5, the rook takes g5. You see g4, you got rook to b8. So as you can see, black is starting to put their own little counter threats down. So we see rook to d2, we got rook to g6, rook e to d3. We got rook to d6, you know, not worrying about, you know, rook taking d6, pawn taking d6. We're not worrying about rook taking d6 because then you're going to be just allowing the rook to just come and like you can never have that in that situation. So we got king up to g3. So the king comes to f8. We have g5. We got king to e7. We have h4. We have bishop to d7. Now that's perfect because you're basically preventing the king from being able to move up the board. Because generally what you want is you want these, you know, this pawn to move up the board. The problem is if you start pushing h pawn now, you're going to be looking at f6. And that's going to be breaking up your structure and it's going to make it a lot easier to attack. So we see f4 and we see bishop to e6. We have a3. We got pawn takes f4, king takes f4. We have rook to h8. And as you can see, it's making it really, really hard for the king because the king can't come here. I mean, it has to kind of come back here. It can't progress up forward. So what you really, really want for your pawns to be doing if they're passed is to be moving. But as you can see, you know, this bishop after f6 can kind of come back here and protect this square here. So you don't really have a lot of perspective on like actually pushing the pawns here. So king comes back to d3. We have c5, rook to d1. We have bishop to c4. King comes to h1. Yeah. We see bishop to e2. Like I said, I mean, you put the rook behind the pawn, which is where you want it, but you know, black just has too many pieces for you to deal with. So we see king to f4. We got king to e6. We have rook to h2, bishop to h5, just perfectly blockading the pawn. So basically black's play is just being up a piece and just trying to prevent, you know, the push of this pawn. For black and white, this is the most important pawn to be paying attention to because as you can see, none of these pawns can move, like ever. So this is the only pawn that really has some influence. So if you can start to push this up a space or two, you're going to be able to put black in a pretty defensive position. So the rook comes to d2. We have bishop to g6. Now we're starting to attack a pawn, and it's really tough for the king and the rook. The rooks and the king are starting to be very tied down. So we see rook to h2. We got f6 opening the position up because that's perfect for the rook and the bishop. Pawn takes f6, king takes f6. We see rook to h3, rook to h5. We see c4. So we're not trying to allow nothing like this going on. So we see c4. King comes to e6. We have rook to h2. We have king to f6. We see rook to h3. And like Karjakin is really hoping for like a draw, like a repeat of a position. But of course, Wesley So's not going to do that. So he goes bishop to f7. We see rook to c3. And then we see rook takes h4. And it's actually in this position that Karjakin does resign. And basically, I mean, you're in a really bad position because you're going to have to desert this pawn. Because you cannot move up at all. Of course, you can't move to the side. And you only have these three options because you're in check, right? So, you know, of course, if you go this way, you're going to be looking at a rook, and that's going to be forcing the trade of the rooks, which is not what you want. And then the same thing with this move. It's going to be, you know, forcing the trade of rooks. And so you're forced to have to go king to g3. But unfortunately, that drops a pawn here. And so now you are equal with pawns, but you do have an extra bishop. And there is almost no way to, you know, protect this pawn, because if you do try to do that, you're going to see the pawn take here. And it doesn't really matter what you do. You know, you're going to be losing. You're going to be losing just more material. So that is that. And that is the second round, and they're actually in the third round now. So I'm gonna be taking a look at that game. I'm gonna try to get all the rounds today. So that way, you know, everybody has like all pretty much, you know, the Wesley Sells games covered. And he is, who is he playing next here? He's playing Timur Rajabov. So they're in that game right now. So I'm going to go ahead and hop off and I will be back with you guys pretty soon. Appreciate you guys very much for coming by. You know, spasibo to you if you're Russian. Meraming Salamat Po Kaibagan, Aking Maga Kaibagan, Mabuhai, and Pa Alam to you. And I'll see you guys next time. All right.